yet.
Bernanke has in secret spent hundreds of billions of dollars bailing out one group and not bailing out another group. I don't see anybody in the news media demanding the kind of transparency at the Fed that you would demand of every other aspect of the federal government. And I think it is corrupt and it is wrong for one man to have that kind of secret power.
So, Congressman Paul, where do you come down on this?
One thing I might say that we have made some inroads on the Federal Reserve. We passed a bill last year. We got a partial, audit of the Fed. We've learned a whole lot. They were dealing in $15 trillion. $5 trillion went overseas to bail out foreign banks. But you know what? Congress did a lot. I've worked on it for a good many years, but Bloomberg helped and Fox helped. They had court cases, Freedom of Information Act, and there are some even at this table who didn't think auditing the Fed was such a good idea, that we could call up the Fed and ask them, and they would tell us what they're doing. I've been calling them up for 30 years, and they never tell me. But we're getting to the bottom of it. But if you want to understand why we have a problem, you have to understand the Fed, because the cause comes from the business cycle. We shouldn't be asking what to do exactly with the recession. Obviously, we have to deal with that, but you can't cure the disease if you don't know the cause of it. And the cause is the booms. When there are booms, and they're artificial, whether it's the CRA or whether it's the Fed easy credit, when you have bubbles, whether it's the NASDAQ or whether it's the housing bubbles, they burst. And when they do, you have to have corrections, and that's what we're dealing with. And we can do this by building coalitions and not sacrificing any principle.
Would you get the federal government out of housing? Yes.
Absolutely. I mean, there's no need to. Look at
no Freddie Mac, no Fannie Mae, nothing.
That's where the distortions come. That's where the moral hazard comes from. That's where the malinvestment, overbuilt. It was predictable. You talked about what economists we should look to, and unfortunately, we've been living with Keynesian economics for many, many decades, and everybody who was right about predicting the bubbles were Austrian economists. They said they were coming, and yet they're also saying, and I agree with them, that everything that we're doing right now is wrong. So what we did with the housing bubble, yes, we had too many houses. It was glaring in our face. The bubble was doomed to burst, and it came because of Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, easy credit, and also Community Reinvestment Act. So who got into trouble? The people who did the speculating, the Wall Street, the derivatives market. They got the bailout. They got privileges. So what happened to the middle class? They lost their jobs. They lost their houses. This whole system is all messed up. And what I hear here is just tinkering with the current system and not looking at something new and different. And it's a free market economy without a Federal Reserve System, with sound money. If you don't have that, you're going to continue with the bubble. And this propping up this debt and keeping the correction. You need the correction. You need to get rid of the malinvestment and the debt. The debt is the burden on the economy.
All right, we'll be back. Take a break and be right back. Stay with us from Dartmouth to Hanover, New Hampshire. Congressman Paul.
Since the Federal Reserve is the engine of inflation, creates the business cycle, produces our recessions and our depressions, the Federal Reserve obviously is a very important issue. Unfortunately, tonight we have a former director of the Federal Reserve at Kansas City. So I have a question for Mr. Kaine. Mr. Kaine, in the past, you've been rather critical of any of us who would want to audit the Fed. You said you've used pretty strong terms that we were ignorant and that we didn't know what we were doing. And therefore, there was no need for a Fed audit anyway, because if you had one, you're not going to find out everything because everybody knows everything about the Fed. But now that we have found and we've gotten an audit, we have found out an awful lot on how special businesses get, bailed out. Wall Street, the banks, and special companies, foreign governments. And you said that you advise those of us who are concerned and you belittled, you say, call up the Federal Reserve and just ask them to get a PR person. So do you still stick by this, that this is frivolous, or do you think it's very important? 64% of the American people want a full audit of the Fed on a regular basis.
Mr. Kaine.
First of all, you have misquoted me.
I did not call you or any of your people ignorant. I don't know where that came from.
I'll get it for you.
All right? Now, so you got to be careful of the stuff that you get off the internet, because that's just not something that I have said. Secondly, when I served on the board of the Federal Reserve in the 1990s, we didn't do any of the things that this Federal Reserve is doing. I don't agree with the actions of this Federal Reserve. I don't agree with the actions that have been undertaken by Ben Bernanke.
I have a question for Mr. Kane. Mr. Kane, in the past, you've been rather critical of any of us who would want to audit the Fed. You said you've used pretty strong terms that we were ignorant and that we didn't know what we were doing, and therefore there was no need for a Fed audit anyway, because if you had one, you're not going to find out everything, because everybody knows everything about the Fed. But now that we have found and we've gotten an audit, we have found out an awful lot on how special businesses get, bailed out. Wall Street, the banks, and special companies, foreign governments.